Hi there. Welcome to Group 5's Public Management Practices Report, where we will be looking at the budgeting process in the Texas House of Representatives. Budgeting is a management practice that can provide insight into an organization's priorities and performance. An organization's budget can assist with planning, performance, evaluation, coordination of activities, implementing plans, and motivating and authorizing activities. The Texas state budget best mirrors a performance-based budget that ties appropriations to goals, strategies, and related performance targets and outcomes, with limited agency-level flexibility. Texas is one of 20 states that produces a budget on a biennial basis. The Texas budgeting cycle can best be described as an arduous 4-year process of consensus building, policy development, and administration to spend approximately $120 billion over 2 years. This process involves all state agencies, the Office of the Governor, the Texas State Legislature, the Comptroller of Public Accounts, Legislative Budget Board, and the State Auditor's Office. The budget cycle begins with a vision provided by the Office of the Governor. This statement provides a framework for the development of strategic plans and sets forth a mission for the state government, core principles to guide decision-making, and goals and benchmarks for various state agencies and programs. Additionally, the governor is required to submit a budget proposal. Prior to the legislative session, each state agency provides a legislative appropriations request that outlines the funding needed to meet its mission and achieve specific performance measures. Once the biennial legislative session begins, the Comptroller of Public Accounts provides legislators with a biennial estimate that provides an understanding of the estimated revenues and ensures legislators do not appropriate more revenue than will be collected. In the Texas State House, the House Appropriations Committee has jurisdiction over appropriations bill. The House Appropriations Committee consists of several standing committees such as General Government, Health and Human Services, Education, Criminal Justice, and Economic Development. Each subcommittee holds public hearings and makes recommendations on budget proposals for agencies, programs, and funding under its jurisdiction. To ensure a budget meets the needs of an organization, it should consider and take into account the needs and objectives of all affected stakeholders. As one can imagine, engaging all affected stakeholders when preparing a statewide budget can be overly cumbersome. However, effective processes can ensure that their voices are represented and reflected in the budget. Preparing the Texas state budget requires engaging more than 100 state agencies, lobbyists, citizen activists, and legislative members from each House and Senate district across the state. During the legislative session, subcommittees host public hearings and working groups where they work to develop a budget to present to the larger legislative body. During this review and adoption phase, testimony from each state agency is combined with testimony and recommendations from all affected stakeholder groups to provide lawmakers and necessary insight into the specific budgetary needs of each agency and the state as a whole. Once lawmakers complete the arduous task of getting a spending bill out of a committee and in front of the full body, members have the opportunity to propose amendments during debate. Because this process occurs in both the House and Senate, lawmakers must reconcile the differences in the two proposed spending bills. Through conference committee, members of each chamber appointed by the respective leadership works to reconcile the differences between the two proposals. Once an appropriations bill makes its way through the legislative process and is approved by both chambers of the legislature, it is sent to the governor's office for approval, where they must decide to approve by signing it, allow it to become law without signing it, or exercise the line item veto. This allows the governor to strike specific provisions and budget items before signing it. Once the reconciled bill is processed by the Texas governor, state agencies, including the public colleges and universities, begin the process of enactment.
The House of Representatives was established in 1845. It's composed of 150 locally elected representatives who have districts containing about 167,000 constituents. Representatives serve 2-year terms with no term limits, the House is presided over by the Speaker of the House, who is elected by his peers on the first day of session. The Speaker of the House presides over the House while it is in session, acting as a moderator for debate and answering parliamentary questions. In addition, he has other duties, including assigning members to standing committees to work during the legislative session. Currently, there are 49 standing committees, 5 select committees, and 7 joint committees. The next legislative session will mark Texas's 86th session and will convene per law at noon on the second Tuesday of an odd-numbered year. This means it will begin on January 8th, 2019.
Performance-based budgeting is a non-traditional reform tying the allocation of budgetary resources to sophisticated analysis of the measures of the effects of government programs. When implemented properly, it should lead to more efficient and more effective management of public funds. The 3 guiding principles of performance-based budgeting are: number 1, governments must be acutely aware of the needs of citizens and not solely focus on the rules and regulations. Number 2, taxes are rendered for results, not effort. And, number 3, there is a need to measure and communicate progress. Many countries and most states use performance-based budgeting due to policy diffusion and the economic demands and pressures of citizens. Ideally resulting in budget allocations that are more closely reflect the relative merit of the programs, performance-based budgeting integrates the results of the performance measurement into the budgeting process. Difficulties come in the risks of politicization of the process, as well as the difficulty in knowing how to use this data. Zero-based budgeting is a repeatable process to rigorously review every dollar amount in the annual budget, manage monthly financial performance, and build a culture of cost management. It looks for the most efficient return on spending from the bottom up, asking if money will be spent efficiently rather than compare it to the previous year. The 5 factors of success required are: number 1, deeper visibility into cost drivers; number 2, dual ownership governance model; number 3, the rigorous process for planning and monitoring; number 4, aligned incentives; and number 5, mindset. Bain & Company suggests that organizations seeking to use zero-based budgeting should take the following steps. Number 1, re-envision. Bain & Company suggests that organizations seeking to use zero-based budgeting should take the following steps. Number 1, re-envision the business and ask what activities and resources will truly be needed to compete under future market conditions. Then set a clear strategic vision and cost target. Number 2, build a comprehensive fact base of current offerings, functions, and expenses. Number 3, use a blank sheet of paper approach to identify state and identify vital incentives. Number 4, build the future state, bottom up, by justifying what activities should be performed. And number 5, reset budgets and full-time employee levels.
Many factors come into play when you look at budgets in theory versus reality. Budgets are full of estimates. During the Great Recession in 2007 through 2009, the state legislature had to make estimates on revenues. This led to issues in 2011 where the state was left scrambling to pay its bills. A similar issue in 2013 was the price of oil as it dropped off during 13 and 14. This led to expenditures in 2015 that were difficult to cover. The state has a remedy for these variances with the Economic Stability Fund. This is currently at $12 billion. Along the same lines as estimates, economic indicators sometimes don't match reality. The state over the past few years has had an influx of new residents, and the legislature has translated this into more sales tax. But in reality, over the last few years, sales tax per capita has actually decreased. Another area of budget theory is producing a budget off of a zero-based or performance-based budget. But this can be difficult when there is statutory spending required at the state level. The state is currently required to spend 60 to 70% of its revenues on statutory spending of school funding and federally mandated Medicaid. With such a high percentage of the budget mandated to spending, it does not allow the legislature to appropriate funds on a performance-based need. Another theory in budgets is transparency. Budgets are supposed to be clear and very transparent on their revenues and expenditures. But sometimes in reality, this isn't true. Details are not provided on how they get to their numbers in the budgets, it just gives the result. The state of Texas has sometimes played the peanut and shell game by delaying payments or deferring them to the next budget cycle just to keep the budget balanced. Another theory in budgeting is restricting revenues for a specific purpose. In the state of Texas, the taxes we pay at the gasoline pumps go to the highway fund. This fund is for highway maintenance and bridge maintenance. Although during prior budgets, this fund was rated by $3 billion per budget to pay for DPS, who was not an original party to the purpose. Another restricted revenue is the sporting goods sales tax. This revenue is restricted to the state's Parks Department. The state put spending caps on funds to make sure that they weren't drained within a one-year time frame, but this resulted in this fund actually growing year over year. And during a time when the state parks desperately needed funding, they could not get the required funds out of this account. The state later had to reverse these spending caps so they could appropriate all the funds collected to the Parks Department. These are just a few examples of where theory and reality when it comes to budgets sometimes don't mix.
Members face various management challenges while creating a budget that is both balanced and based on good policy. The first challenge members face is that they aren't working with any real numbers. All calculations when they begin the budget process during the interim before the legislative session, the budget goes up for a vote, is all estimates on revenue that the comptroller hasn't seen and is controlled by a lot of external factors, which the state has zero control over. This results in generally budgets that are underfunded. To what degree, it depends on whether or not we're having a really bad economic year. Sometimes it's smaller, sometimes it's quite a bit. But what always happens is the next legislative session, lawmakers have to come back and draft and pass a supplemental budget to cover the delta from the previous fiscal year. Another challenge lawmakers face while they begin allocating these funds is that they are limited by 4 constitutional spending limits that really limit how legislators can allocate the funds at their disposal. The 4 constitutional spending limits are the debt spending limit, the welfare spending limit, the pay-as-you-go limit, and the limit on the growth of certain appropriations limit, or otherwise known as the spending limit. These constitutional limits were passed a minimum of 2 decades ago. Some of them were even passed in the 1940s, but they were passed by voters in the state of Texas at the time. These limits are fairly restrictive, but they aren't really well known, which means when people, just general citizens, come to talk about the budget and funding more programs like welfare programs that exist in the state, they aren't aware that legislators are restricted to spending only 1% of the state budget on welfare programs. Another challenge that is fairly obvious from the first day of session is the high turnover that is in the House of Representatives. Normally around 20% of the body are freshmen in the House, meaning this is the first time serving the legislature. And since every House member has a vote in the budget, this is a significant population who has no understanding of how the budget process works or even more technical aspects of the budget, like the spending limits mentioned earlier. This leads to re-education of members constantly, session after session, not only by the House membership, but also through state agencies and their leadership who come to members, and especially freshman members, and have to defend their programs and their agencies and the budgets they've asked for. This is extremely time intensive, and unfortunately a lot of freshman members still don't come out at the end understanding the importance of the budget and the more technical aspects that go into creating it. And one of the largest hurdles lawmakers will face is at the end of session, once the bill is passed, it goes to the governor to be signed. However, in Texas, the governor has the authority to line item veto in the Appropriations Act, meaning he can remove individual sections of the bill without vetoing the entire bill. Under Governor Greg Abbott, the power of the line item veto has been expanded, since under Governor Perry and previous governors, it had been restricted to appropriation amounts only. But in 2015, he was able to expand it to also cover informational language or instructive language for the state agencies from the membership. This expansion is fairly controversial in the legislature because it's seen as the governor interfering in the decisions from both the House and Senate members.
Utilizing your organization's budget as an effective tool for management requires proper preparation that considers your long-term planning goals, objectives, and priorities. Additionally, an effective budget requires active involvement from stakeholders throughout your organization. The challenges of developing a comprehensive statewide budget, including built-in expenditure pressures and conflicting policy priorities, are not unique to Texas or state governments. Rather, these are challenges that are experienced by all organizations regardless of size. While effective budgets can be a useful tool for managers, it is useless when used in isolation. Budgets must be paired with good management practices across the organization, including human resources and organization culture.